Hi everyone, we're going to start designing for summer today, and now's the perfect time to switch gears and really generate your 4th of July wreaths as well as your summer wreaths. People are getting the sense of the warmth outside and they're truly thinking summer, so now's the perfect time to start cranking these out. We're going to be using a small sign today that says wipe your flip-flops. The interesting thing about signs like this, where it's printed on one side, is that they come in all sorts of sizes. They typically carry this size, which is kind of their medium, a larger one for your standard 18-inch grapevine wreath or 24-inch work wreath, and they also have smaller ones that are typically about 3 inches by 5 inches. This size and the larger size are my go-to. These are extremely inexpensive signs. They range from anywhere from $2.50 all the way up to $7 for the large ones, so extremely economical. But we're going to be using it on a 10 to 15 inch work wreath today, and I will have these listed on my website relatively soon. I have a whole bunch of these that I'd love to give you guys at a reduced rate, specifically just for the group. But we're going to be using 10 inch by 10 yard mesh today. This is personally my favorite size of mesh to work with. We could use it in pretty much all different forms, but we're going to be doing the ruffle technique today, and you'll be seeing why I chose that technique a little bit later on. But the item number for this is RE136622. And this is kind of in between your premium deco mesh and your basic. There is some wide foil. It's not as wide as the one that's completely laser foiled all throughout, but it does have some tinsel, so it's not your basic. So this is about $4 or $5 for this roll. And the item number for the sign is 41-00841. And what we're going to do is go ahead and cut our mesh to size. We're going to count how many twist ties we have on this. It truly depends on the wreath. Sometimes they're 1 or 2 off, so just go through and count them as you're opening up the wreath form, which I'll show you guys in just a bit. But we're going to cut the mesh anywhere from 18 to 20 inches long. Since it's not your basic, we don't have to go the full 24 inches if we really want to make it not see-through. So anywhere from 18 to 20 inches with nice clean cuts is perfect for this. So I'm going to go throughout and cut all of the mesh. So real quick, I just want to talk about how I cut my mesh, and I happen to use a rotary cutter. This is probably one of the best investments I have made for my business, and it was relatively inexpensive. You can pick these up from anywhere from $8 to $30 depending on where you source it and what brand you purchase. But you could also be using your 40, 50, and 60% off coupons of this for a single item. But you're also going to need a self-healing mat. These two are kind of symbiotic. You have to have one for the other to work properly. You can't be cutting this on a hardwood table or any other surface. It'll just cut up the surface as well as damage your blade very quickly. So this is a self-healing mat. I have a Fiskars self-healing mat and an Olfa rotary cutter, and I truly can't stress how helpful those have been. I definitely recommend you cut your mesh using a cutting tool like this over scissors, because you do end up with nice clean cuts, as you can see here, and it doesn't serrate the edge and make it all frayy. So I definitely recommend you guys purchase one of these when you're able to. So now that we have all of our mesh cut, it's time to add it to our 10 to 15 inch work wreath. And just a little heads up, whenever we design on work wreaths, I typically like to keep the twist ties on. You are spending extra money for it already pre-made, and I kind of feel as though they enhance your wreath if you use the right colors. We're using white today. We could also be using pink, purple, or blue, since it matches our sign as well as the florals we're going to be working with. But whenever you're purchasing one, always be extra cautious to purchase one that matches your product. That way you don't have to go ahead and remove them by cutting them. But what we're going to do first is we're going to open up our work wreath, and this is something I've done since the beginning. I think it helps tremendously when adding your mesh, because you don't have to sit there and fiddle with opening them. Sometimes they're twisted together relatively tight, so you don't have to sit there and try to open them up. If they're all open ahead of time, it's very easy to place your mesh directly inside. So just go throughout and open them up. So just to recap what we already did, we already cut all of the mesh, one piece for each of the twist ties, and we cut them anywhere from 18 to 20 inches long. I give you guys rough estimates because it doesn't have to be exact for this particular technique, which is going to be the ruffle technique. So we'll put our wreath to the side for a second, and what we're going to do here is we're going to create the ruffles, and to create them, you're going to lie your mesh flat like this, and then you're simply going to gather towards the middle. And once you create it, it's going to look like kind of like a bow tie, and that's exactly the effect we want to go for. Like that. And now what we're going to do is come back to the wreath and place one piece of mesh inside of each of the twists, just like that. So we're going to go throughout and add one to every twist tie. And this is one of my favorite techniques. Not only is it perfect for beginners, but it always comes out nice without making your wreath too poofy. And for this size wreath, I would stay away from using anything larger than this. Typically, mesh comes in 2 sizes for the most part. Online, it usually comes in 10-inch lengths and 21-inch lengths. So as you can see, for this wreath, 21 inches of mesh creating a poof technique would just create too large of a wreath for this size frame to maintain. But whenever you're dealing with smaller wreath frames like this, don't try to force a hole in the central portion of the wreath. You're never going to get that perfect center. So always use these wreaths for signs that you may have, that you love, and just can't seem to put a design to. These are perfect for that because it kind of supports your sign in the middle. It kind of props it up. But if you are a beginner, this is the perfect mesh wreath for you. It's very hard to mess up since we're doing the same process over and over again. And another question I get asked by a lot of you is, does it matter where we start or where we finish? And for this particular method, it doesn't matter at all, since every single twist tie is going to end up with a piece of mesh. You could skip some, you could come back to them, you could go whatever's closest to your hands. It doesn't make a difference as long as every twist tie has a piece of mesh in the end. And we always want to save ourselves time and headaches as the busy season progresses or gets closer. So this is a great technique to create a bunch of bases early on in the season using generic colors like burlap mesh or white or yellow or blue, and just saving them. You could store them directly on top of each other without any product on them. And as seasons come closer or holidays come closer, you can begin adding ornaments, your ribbon, your signs. But creating a bunch of these, if you know it's going to be a hot seller, can definitely help out tremendously as the busy season approaches, like Christmas and fall. So just keep that in mind. This is the perfect technique for creating bases ahead of time because you don't have to add anything to them, and you could store these very easily without crushing them. So we placed one piece around the whole perimeter, and now we're coming into the interior and placing more mesh. But once you have all the prep work done, as we did ahead of time by opening up the twist and cutting all of the mesh in advance, creating these is very, very quick. And if you do a lot of sales in multiple quantities of things that may have been a hot seller before, and you know they're going to be a hot seller again, you could kind of have a production line set up. You could do all of the mesh in advance for 5 or 6 wreaths, and open up all of the twist ties, and then do everything in steps. It makes it very easy on you by having everything done in advance like this. And once you get the hang of it, if you are new to creating mesh wreaths, and you start practicing, it is very quick to create these. So now we're adding our last piece of mesh. And like I said before, you're not going to be able to see a hole in the center, which is perfectly fine because it'll help prop up the smaller sign we're using today. Okay, so here's our mesh base right here, and it's pretty all on its own. You know, often people have a bunch of these made, which I may do a future video on, using the same color of mesh like this with matching twist ties, and you could place them on every single window on your exterior and kind of create a showy look for your house. So our next step is to begin attaching our sign to the wreath, and the best method of doing so is using a staple gun. We're using 1/4-inch staples today, and even though our sign does come with a jute hanger right here, this is not going to be enough to hang the whole entire wreath from, and it will sag. And we do want to have supports at different perspectives. So what I always do is I take that piece of cord right there, and I just staple it to our sign like that. And since this sign is a little bit small, it's not small enough for that piece to go through since it's such a thick rope. It might be a little bit thin for the pipe cleaner to attach to without coming through to the front of the sign. So what I use for that is just a scrap piece of ribbon. Here we just have a little bit of jute ribbon, and what we're going to do is just simply fold it over on itself like this to create a kind of a backing to kind of prop up the staple. And then we're going to take a couple pipe cleaners, put those on the back, and now we can attach our staples. I'm using 1/4" staples and stapling it several times. And as you can see, with that little support of the ribbon, which is about 1/2 inch thick or 1/4 inch thick, definitely supports the 1/4 inch staples. So we'll do the same thing for the opposing side to make sure that the staples don't go to the front of the sign. And if you're ever hesitant about it, this is definitely something you could do just to ensure that it's not going to go to the front. And I always like to kind of triple up on my staples to make sure that the sign's not going anywhere. So now what we'll do is we'll come back to our wreath. We'll make sure all of the twist ties that are in the middle point towards the middle so that we can kind of hide those. Even though we are paying extra for the work wreath, you can't purchase a small work wreath without the twist ties like that for such a low cost like this. Dollar Tree carries 14-inch work wreaths, which are a little bit larger for this sign. So I am going to be working with this size wreath, but we don't need them showing because we're not going to be adding any ribbon today, and you'll find out why in just a little bit. But what we're doing now is we're taking our pipe cleaners, feeding them through the work wreath, and making sure we're attaching them to the metal in the back. Never just attach them to the mesh. It will eventually sag, and you don't want that to happen 3 months down the line for your customer. You want it to stay exactly where we're placing it. And then make sure to give it several twists in the back. So if you're ever adding florals to a mesh wreath, I recommend both the poof technique as well as the ruffle technique. If we're doing curl technique, you definitely have to have something as a solid base underneath it, or else all of your flowers would kind of get lost in the mesh. So make sure you're pulling it tight and adding several twists to it. Just like that. And then you could rearrange your sign a little bit to your liking. But our next step is to begin adding some florals. So we're going to start off by adding just some simple greenery, and we're actually going to be using it from the hydrangeas that we used in a previous video. So you may remember the 24-inch oval wreath that we created using a bunny. We didn't use the hydrangea leaves in that, and these are a little bit cheaper than my liking, but since we are creating a rather whimsical, inexpensive wreath today, they will be perfectly fine to add some substance to this wreath. So I'm just going to snip off the leaves at the base and use those. And by using them this way, we're not wasting anything from this bush that we purchased from AC Moore. So I'm not going to give you the item number for this. It was in the previous video, and I don't want you to go out to just purchase them for the leaves. But it is in the previous video, and if you already purchased those hydrangea bushes for the bunny wreath, you could use your foliage for this. And it's kind of a kill two birds with one stone type of deal because we're not wasting any material. So now we're going to dip them in our glue skillet and apply them randomly. And we may lift some of them underneath the mesh. But the only thing we got to do with these is make sure that they're all pointing away from the wreath. Think of these like petals from a flower. All of them should be facing away from the seeds in the middle. So when you add these, make sure that they're all pointing towards the outside like that. So we can continue flipping the wreath around, adding them at random. So this right here just provided a little pop of green. Our next step is to be adding more foliage as well as more florals, but if we're ever able to use up the entire bush from the foliage all the way down to the flowers, that's always great because we are saving money that way, and we didn't have to go out and purchase foliage just for this wreath. We just ended up using what we had that would have probably most likely been tossed away. So our next step is to add just a little bit more greenery, and I thought the perfect greenery for this, because it's perfectly straight and doesn't kind of cascade, which we typically use, is this variegated foliage. And for this wreath today, we are going to want to go light in our foliages, so nothing that's hunter green. If anything, you want to stick to lime green, chartreuses, anything that's a little bit more bright and cheerful than your darker boxwoods and stuff of that nature. So this came from Hobby Lobby. It was $5.99, 50% off, and the item number for this is 476564. And what we're going to do is go throughout each bush and cut each stem approximately in half. That way we end up with a lot of separate pieces like this that we could place throughout the wreath. So we're just going to go throughout and trim them all down until they're about 3 to 6 inches long. So typically cut them about in half. So you're only going to need one spray of this because we are going to load up on some flowers and some different textures. So our next step is to disperse these evenly. And we did end up with some pieces that are a little bit smaller, just depending on the way that they were sitting. And what I mean by smaller is that we have a couple single-stemmed ones. So these ones were a lot lower than the rest of the leaves. So rather than cut it down the middle, I just went right above the leaves and I snapped it off there. You always want to do your cuts. Let's see how well the camera can pick this up. But you always want to do your cuts right above the leaf node. That way you don't see any of that stem showing. It just cheapens your overall design if you have any of that showing. So always just remove it as low as you possibly can. So now what we're going to do is just begin adding them at random, but we do want to make sure that we evenly distribute them. And since we are designing on a smaller wreath today, we don't need any more than one stem. One stem will be plenty of greens for this. So I'm just taking a couple of the longer ones and placing them towards the perimeter. And then we'll come back in towards closer to the sign and place a few more. We'll try to save some of the singular sets of leaves for closer towards the sign. That way it's not overly bulky around this area. And you do want to make sure you do apply a generous amount of hot glue. You truly want these to stay exactly where they are. And even though they are relatively lightweight, you do want to make sure that they're not going to come apart, especially in the summer sun. So we just have a few more that we can pepper in. So again, these singular pieces should be placed closer towards the sign. And that goes for any design you're creating. If you're doing a design of this nature, you do want to make sure you place these ones closer towards the sign. That way you don't completely cover the sign, and it gradually gets from smaller to larger as you work out. Okay, so we have one more little piece left. That I think we'll just place right here. So this is what the wreath looks like so far by adding one spray of $3 variegated greenery. Like I said before, whatever greenery you decide to use, make sure it's lighter in color rather than darker. It'll definitely create a better effect. So our next step is to add some flowers, and we're going to be using some of these dainty hot pink flowers today. They're more of a berry, but overall they come off as a flower. These were $4 original price, 50% off, so $2 for this spray from Michaels, and this is from their spring and summer collection. The item number for this is 577926, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop off each little section individually, and they all come off in little pieces like this. So I went ahead and I did this to one bush. Again, these were $2 each bush, and then you could also be saving some additional money, because every now and then they do 20% off your total purchase. So we're starting off with one bush so far, and then if we need to break down a second bush, we certainly can. For $2 a bush, you truly can't go wrong. That's a great value. And by breaking them down into smaller segments like this, it's easier to disperse them throughout the entire wreath without making it look clumpy. So you're spreading your dollar as far as you possibly can. But for this specific bush, this is one of those bushes that if you break down to smaller pieces, just by simply cutting it, it will fall apart. These aren't secured directly to the stem. They're only placed along the stem, so they kind of slide off, if you know what I mean. So just to demonstrate what I mean, is if you take your flowers and just run them up the stem like that, they all come off. So if we were to cut this stem in half, all of these pieces below that half would just simply slide off the entire wreath over time. So like I said before, we're starting with one bush that I just separate into multiple pieces. And these come in all sorts of colors from Michaels. They have them in blue, they have them in pink, they have them in a darker pink like this color, also a baby pink. They have them in purple, white, green, yellow, orange, every single color you can think of. And as you can see, just one bush does truly go a long way. And by breaking it down like this, it reduces the look of a clumpy wreath since we're dealing with such a small surface area. By breaking them down, it alleviates that clumpy look and also makes you have a lot more pieces that you could add throughout. Okay, so our final piece from this particular bush. And that's the effect we get just by adding one of the bushes. So we can decide at this point if we want to add another bush of this color or if we want to mix it up and then come back to this if need be. I think we're going to do the second route where we're going to add different flowers to this, and if we need more, we could always add more at the low price of only $2 for the bush. So our next flower is actually going to be the same exact one we just used. The reason being is that we want to tie in some of the blue that the sign has. A lot of the sign has some of the blue in it. So rather than using a very artificial looking flower, even though this is kind of more of a decorator's approach, we're not doing something that's extremely realistic. We're just trying to have some fun with some color for summer. But I still like to be conscientious of the fact that many flowers don't come in the blue form. We've worked with blue hydrangeas, but now it's time to add a different texture. So we're going to be using the same exact flowers at the same price, just in blue. And the item number for the blue ones are 572975. And we're going to do the same exact process where we're going to pop them off like that. And they come off very easily, as you can see. And we're going to add them in little pieces rather than clumps. Because if we were to divide this in each stem, we would only end up with 5 singular clumps, which would kind of look clumpy throughout the entire design. So we're going to add these the same exact way. So in any of the negative spaces is the perfect time to add some of this blue. And for $2 a bush, I truly can't stress enough that that's an extremely good deal. And if you can get it even more reduced by using a coupon that they occasionally have for total purchases, it's even better. But these are something you could use year-round. We've used a similar blue flower within a 4th of July wreath. We could buy these in advance and use them for the 4th of July. Also for winter-themed wreaths, such as snowflake wreaths or snowman wreaths, you could use this blue. The pink you could use for Mother's Day, for breast cancer awareness. So always think ahead. And if you can pick up things such as these at a great value, you could use them pretty much universally. They have them in white and green as well. You could use those year-round. They also have yellow, which is perfect for fall and summer, also spring. So just keep an open mind when purchasing your flowers, and think in advance. Think of seasons that are not even close, but if you can get them at a good deal, you'll definitely remember to use them later on. So as you can see, this wreath is quickly filling up using minimal product. And we just have a couple more left. And our final little cluster of blue flowers. We'll just place those right here. So this is what the wreath looks like so far. We have about $3 invested from the variegated foliage that you see here, $4 or so for the 2 bushes of the blue and the pink flowers, and then the hydrangea leaves I won't even calculate because we always have leftover leaves from other projects, and we only used a dozen or so of those faux leaves. So far we have about $10 to $15 invested, but now it's time to bulk it up a little bit more with some florals. So before we add any additional flowers, I thought we would add just a little bit more greenery at a very reduced cost. This came from Jacobson Floral, and I believe it was about $2.50 at the time for this greenery. It is known as a 14-inch pearl grass bush in the color fresh green. Jacobson Floral is a wholesaler online that they ship internationally. They're located in Boston, Mass. They do have a retail store if any of you guys are in New England. But the item number for this is G10932. And as you can see, there's lots of individual blades on this. But unfortunately, this is also like the flowers that we're using today, where if you pull them up, they all come up together. So what we're actually going to do is pull them all up like this, and rather than add them in clumps like this, which would again appear very clumpy, as with the flowers, what we're going to do is simply just pull them off like this. And what you'll end up with is several little clumps of grass like this with 3 or 4 clusters each. So what we're going to do is pull off the bushes like this, and we'll add them individually. And I think the effect we'll get will be greater if we do it this way. So let's start peppering some of those. So I think the overall look and feel of today's design will have kind of like a grass-like effect where everything is shooting out, everything is very narrow. Of course, the existing greenery, the hydrangea leaves, and the variegated foliage will provide some stability in it. It'll provide some weight to the design, but we do want to incorporate lots of airy-like substances like this grass right here. So we're just going to add these at random. If we ever see any little patches that are too much mesh, we're just going to come back in and add some of this grass. And the overall effect will be very interesting, especially in pictures, because you'll be able to see all of the blades of grass shooting out, and it'll create a very natural looking wreath. So I am trying to maintain that boundary of mesh. I'm not going any further past that. If a couple pieces are shooting a little bit further past it, that's okay. But we do really want to stay within those boundaries. As we are trying to create a pretty uniform wreath. So just by adding these few pieces that we're adding, it really bulks up the entire design, which is exactly what we needed. We definitely needed some of this grass. And we're almost done. So this grass is also one of those things that if you find a great deal on, especially any foliage, you find a great deal on, you could use it year-round, just like the flowers that we purchased. So if you find a great deal, definitely snag a bunch of them up. Again, I think these were anywhere from about $2.50 to $3 at the time. So definitely worth it. Okay, so now we just have a few pieces left, so we're going to look around the wreath, see if we have any bare spots that could use some blades of grass, and place them where it's needed. Okay, so here all of the bits and pieces of grass have been added, and it definitely added some whimsy to the design, but still kept the overall shape. We're not trying to extend this, we're trying to keep it uniform and a perfect circle, but it definitely enhanced it significantly. So our next step is to begin adding more flowers. We could add the same flowers that we added before, or we could add a couple more different styles. It's totally up to you. So the final thing we're going to add are just a few more of these miniature red flowers. Reason being, we already have so much texture in this wreath that if we were to add more flowers, I feel like it could possibly get overwhelming. So let's stick to adding some more of these pink flowers. That way we don't have too much texture within this one wreath. Since we are working on such a small wreath, we want to make sure that it still is very pretty, still very eye-catching, but not over the top. So we're just going to add some more of these pink flowers, or pink berries, if you will. And I think this should be plenty after we add these berries. Of course, if we want to add more greenery, we can come back in with some more greenery. But I think we have enough greenery on this particular wreath. So we are adding more colors than I typically would work with in different shades. I like to stick within 2 to 3 colors max. I think with the sign and all the different florals we have, it all blends very nicely together, but if we were to add a different color, I think it could get kind of overwhelming. Same with texture. I'm more concerned about texture in this case than I am about the color scheme. I think we could add another color if we truly wanted to, but I don't want to add it necessarily, especially the texture. If we added a different flower of a different color, I think it would just get a little overwhelming. So basically everything on this wreath besides the hydrangea leaves were extremely inexpensive, but also extremely dainty. You know, nothing on this wreath is overly large. We're not dealing with larger blooms such as Gerber daisies or even hydrangeas. We are using the hydrangea foliage, but it doesn't obstruct anything from the wreath since it is the first layer we added. At this point you could hardly see them, but it did just provide a little pop of green underneath everything. So while we're adding these little pink flowers, let's quickly do a price breakdown. We have $4 worth of the pink flowers. Each bush was $2. We have $2 worth of the blue flowers. We have about $3 worth of the variegated foliage. We have next to nothing for the hydrangea leaves. If you don't have them, you of course don't have to go out and purchase hydrangeas to add to this wreath. You could actually do without them, but we just used them because we had them left over, and I had no intention on using them in a future project. We have about $4 or so for the mesh, and we still have about 2/3 of the roll left over, which is awesome. We could definitely create another small miniature wreath using it. And then we have a couple dollars for the base, which I will provide you guys a link strictly only for the exclusive wreath community for you all to purchase it at a reduced cost. And I'll have those listed within the next couple weeks or so. Of course, you could purchase it in the meantime if you would like, but I do have that option available for you guys. And then just a couple dollars for the sign. Those signs can run anywhere from $2.50 to about $5, depending on the saying and the time of year. Of course, if it is a busier time of year, the signs typically are a little bit more pricey around Christmas and fall. But around this time of year for summer, they're generally about $2.50 to $5 for this. So in total, we have maybe about $15 to $20 invested in a design like this. I would sell in my shop for at least $50, more likely $55. You could load up on it, you could add more if you'd like, but just be cautious of texture. I don't mind you guys adding additional colors to this, but just texture. We already have a lot going on between the variegated foliage, the hydrangea leaves, the sword grass, and the 2 different colored berries. We don't want to overdo it with the different textures. But here's the completed project. I will hang this up on the easel and show you guys a different view of it actually hanging up. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye, everyone. So here's the finished product, and to be honest, I truly enjoy this design. I love the simplicity of it, and I really like the texture that we have going on with the blooms and the grass. I really think those really gave it a nice pop. I love how they're perfectly straight, extending from the central portion of the wreath. I really like the look of that. So all in all, a very inexpensive design, but perfect for spring and summer. This will definitely get your customers anxious for summer. The one thing you could add additional to this wreath are a couple flip-flops. They just recently came out with those this year. They're miniature flip-flops that we could add throughout the wreath. We are trying to keep this budget friendly for the customers that truly don't want to spend too much for the summer but would like a little pop of color. But again, roughly about $15 to $20 depending on what you're using to create this design. All in all, you could actually probably create this for about 10 to 15, depending on if you have some leftover fragments of greenery. You could definitely just piece it together. So figure $15 to $20 for this design. I'd encourage you to sell this anywhere from $50 to $65 is a very reasonable price. And overall, this is definitely a larger miniature wreath than we typically create when we're using the smaller frame. In total, this is probably about 22 inches across, maybe a little bit more. This is almost a full-size wreath using a miniature frame. For some reason, it worked out that way. Maybe the sign pushed the mesh down. But we still have enough mesh to create another version of this, so we only used about $2.50 worth of the mesh. So a very, very low cost wreath, but all in all, it definitely created a very elaborate design. So again, $50 to $65 is a perfect price range for this, and I hope you all enjoyed it.